So, Jimmy, we're a couple of weeks now from the delisting of BSV. What are your reflections on that now?
Well, we're talking about delisting of BSV by some exchanges. Certainly there are many exchanges which still support and list Bitcoin SV. In terms of what we've learned in the last couple of weeks, I think the big lesson we've learned is how the cryptocurrency world as a whole needs to grow up and professionalize. It's something I've been saying a lot in my speeches. And the delisting decision by Binance and Kraken and other exchanges highlights this, because it's clear that the decision to delist by those exchanges had nothing to do with technical issues with BSV or its network. It all had to do with dislike of Craig Wright, a key backer of BSV, and his choice to invoke legal remedies to pursue libel claims against certain people who he believes have been defaming him online. Is that a factor that should be used by exchanges who create the public marketplaces for assets and people's investment of their money? Is that a factor that should be used to delist a token? I think the clear answer is absolutely not. That is not the type of cryptocurrency world we want to create, where the CEOs of a couple of powerful exchanges, by perception, could negatively impact the worldwide market for an asset on their exchange and others just because they don't like one person. That is just not the world we should create for cryptocurrency. It's not what will incentivize financial institutions and retail consumer investors to get more confidence in cryptocurrency. And it's something that I think will lead to a lot more regulatory scrutiny.
But I mean, these are private businesses, and I can see that it's unfortunate from the point of view of BSV, but is there any way of really just stopping them? Can't they just make arbitrary decisions?
They are private businesses, but as we're seeing, more and more jurisdictions are implementing regulations to govern cryptocurrency or digital asset exchanges. And this is a perfect example of why we need more regulatory oversight. While they are private businesses, they create and influence the public markets for investment by people and institutions of their money into assets. The cryptocurrency world wants these assets to be treated seriously, right, as alternatives to money, for example. And if that's what we want, then exchanges, which by their delisting decisions can significantly impact the value of an asset, need to be held to reasonable standards. There need to be objective criteria which have to do with the token and its network itself that should be used to list or delist an asset. And Jesse Powell, the CEO of Kraken, acknowledged in a couple of tweets about a week or so ago that the decision he made to delist BSV had nothing to do with technical issues with it. He took the position that he felt that it was never meeting their technical listing requirements in the first place. Of course, that begs the question why Kraken would list an asset after the Bitcoin Cash hash war last year if it didn't meet its own listing requirements. I'm not going to get into that now, but it was an acknowledgement that the decision had to do with displeasure about how certain leaders of BSV, in particular Craig Wright, were taking legal action against their clients and partners, which is what Mr. Powell acknowledged in this tweet. That's not the reason why an exchange should list an asset that was, by the way, it's, I think, 6th largest market on the Kraken exchange at the time. I would give you this analogy. Let's take Craig Wright out of the picture, because I know he's a provocative figure in the cryptocurrency world. But if this were Vitalik Buterin and he did something that offended CEOs of exchanges, let's say he began taking some legal enforcement actions because people started doubting whether he was really involved in creating Ethereum. Should the CEOs then go delist Ethereum on a day or two's notice, or based on Twitter polls, which is an absolutely ridiculous thing to base a delisting decision on? That's not the type of objective criteria that we should want crypto exchanges to use, because it means that they can wield their personal like or dislike of someone to affect the asset value of millions of investors around the world who have nothing to do with Craig Wright. That is unfair. And I think that's exactly why regulatory agencies across the world should be looking at exercising more regulatory oversight to make sure that crypto exchanges never can do this again.
How would that actually work? Because you'd need to get regulators in all different territories to agree on something and then implement it, I guess.
That's what happens in every other field of business. And all the regulators don't have to agree by different jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction is entitled to enact the laws and regulations they want. We see this in the securities realm, right, with securities exchanges or securities offerings. Certainly some jurisdictions end up becoming the leaders, such as the United States, certain EU jurisdictions, for setting sort of with first mover advantage the standards which may be applied. That happens in securities law, for example, where a lot of countries look to the United States and its interpretation of securities law to set a standard. So I think regulatory agencies should do what a lot of people in crypto don't like, but is necessary, which is regulate not the blockchains themselves, but the companies that operate on them, which include crypto exchanges. So for example, I'd like to see standards that are articulated for what are the criteria an exchange can use. It should be things such as what's the trading volume, what is the hash rate that appears on the network to support it, what's the level of application and development on it, are there signs of wash trading, for example, which would indicate that people are trying to manipulate the market. Those are the types of objective criteria that should be used. And what's interesting is when Binance even announced its decision, it listed a number of criteria it supposedly uses to delist, but did not identify which were the criteria that Bitcoin SV met or did not meet.
So you're president of the Bitcoin Association. Will the Bitcoin Association be talking to regulators or coming up with some suggestions as to how this regulation might work?
Well, we've already been in that process for quite some time, even before this delisting drama with Bitcoin SV. So for example, I have reviewed several sets of legislation over the past number of months from different countries and provided input either directly to the government agency or through other people for digital asset business legislation that a lot of countries are considering. This recent controversy just will encourage us more to give more specific advice to regulators about the criteria they should use to evaluate an exchange, both for licensing and the listing and delisting criteria that are used.
And are regulators in general kind of interested in having this conversation?
I think so, absolutely, because, look, let's be honest, we need to create more confidence for financial institutions as well as the ordinary consumer to invest in and use cryptocurrency. Everyone in the crypto world should want that. And this incident, as well as the recent news about Bitfinex and Tether with the fraud case that has been brought against them, or at least the start of a fraud case by the New York Attorney General's office, really shakes that confidence, right? The fraud allegation.
Just explain that to us a little bit.
Well, for example, the New York Attorney General's office has alleged in the start of what is appears to be a legal action that the company behind Bitfinex and Tether covered up $850 million of losses of funds through Tether, and that means that Tether, which has argued all this time that it is fully backed by actual fund reserves. Now some people are saying, well, okay, it was more just like a fractionally reserved banking system, so it's not fully backed, but fractionally reserved. Okay, well, if that is the case, and there are not funds to cover all of the tokenized assets, then there's been misleading of the public going on. And it's also Tether tokens that have, many people believe, driven up and supported the increased price of Bitcoin, especially during the rapid rise about a year ago. And if so much of our cryptocurrency valuation and the prices you see are based on people investing with Tether, and it's not fully backed by actual funds, then a lot of our current cryptocurrency market is inflated with purchases that aren't really backed by funds.
So how does that whole episode make you feel when you think about the delisting of BSV?
You know, when I read the news about the New York Attorney General's case against Bitfinex and Tether, I will be honest with you, I sat back in my chair in front of my computer and went, isn't that ironic that there is this report of what, if proven true, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for a second here, but if proven true, massive fraud in the Tether and Bitfinex ecosystem. And yet, none of the exchanges have whispered a peep about potentially delisting Tether, USDT. Yet, some of them were so quick to want to delist Bitcoin SV because of Craig Wright actually invoking the legal process and the court system, right, to defend his own rights. So there's a real irony, if not hypocrisy there, that an asset, Bitcoin SV, where we are doing real work to create real value and purposely not telling anyone to invest in BSV because of how they feel about Craig. I think people should make their investment decisions about real value, not about any personality. So the exchanges were so quick to delist BSV, yet we have a very serious charge of very major fraud against a token, Tether, that has been rumored for a long time to not be fully backed. And yet there's not a single exchange I have seen or heard raise their hand and say, maybe we should consider delisting USDT. That hypocrisy, I think, is staggering and is exactly the kind of exchange environment we should not have for cryptocurrency.
This is what people mean when they talk about the Wild West phase, I guess.
It is the Wild West. And we are the big voice, even though it's unpopular to a lot of original cryptocurrency people, of saying, let's take it out of the Wild West. To get big businesses and the ordinary consumer, to get people like my mother willing to use Bitcoin, they need to feel safe. That means they need to feel that if they purchased a token on an exchange, that tomorrow some exchange CEO is not going to devalue it by a single decision because they don't like one person.
We need to move from the Wild West to the suburbs, I think.
Correct, or hopefully Metropolis one day. I'm a big city guy. So that's why Bitcoin and the whole crypto world needs to grow up with more reasonable standards that are applied to exchanges. I'm not saying a private business can't do what it wants, but it needs to apply some reasonableness to it, especially if it affects public markets for investors. This is not just about a store deciding I want to take a certain product off my shelves, when that doesn't affect the whole market for other investors.
So it's also not just a BSV protecting itself issue either.
Absolutely. BSV may have triggered the controversy and may be the focus of spotlight right now, but what we're urging in terms of more regulatory oversight and a compliance regime is going to be good for all participants in the cryptocurrency world. We want more confidence from everyone. We also think that at the end of the day, the role of exchanges will change in the future. Right now, it's kind of like for a lot of the exchanges, this sort of casino-like environment where they support many, many tokens that people are investing in, let's be honest, out of pure speculation. They're going to make money really quick, buy a Lambo, and sell out. And that's not what we want. We want a cryptocurrency and blockchain world that's building real assets with real utility that generates real value. That's what we're focused on with Bitcoin SV, which is why I don't like to talk about price. I don't like to talk about where the price will be in a month or a year or 6 years, because that's not where it should start. It should start by building real usage, and that's what we're focused on with businesses as well as the scaling work we're doing with BSV, because unless that happens, then the asset won't have any real value long term.
Thank you very much, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Thanks.